I had the perfect Module C reflection prepared and memorized for my final Year 12 English exam. However, when I rocked up and flipped to the back of the booklet, I realized the examiners were only asking for a 25-mark creative piece. And it was at that moment I knew that I had just lost out on the Band 6 for Year 12 HSC English. Now, to be fair, when I was sitting the HSC, Module C was a completely new component to English studies. And so teachers and students were still trying to figure out, things like exam strategy. I thought memorizing an essay like I was doing for Module A and Module B was my go-to strategy. I'm quite good at memorizing things, and so I thought I would apply it to Module C, but yeah, that clearly didn't work.
You're a donut! You're so stupid! You're so stupid! You're stupid!
I think when it comes to Module C, the most complex and confusing component of Module C is definitely the reflection component. And so in today's video, I'm going to do my best to walk through how to craft a Band 6 reflection. Now, if you'd like the full breakdown, we actually have a Module C reflection cheat sheet that's been written by one of our high-performing KIS English tutors, which you can check out using the first link in the description. But without further ado, let's get into crafting that Band 6 reflection for you. So I'm a big believer that Module C reflections can make or break your final exams. And I speak from experience because it literally cost me a Band 6. Now, when it comes to writing a reflection, a common way we've seen people write reflections is something along the following lines. My story explores themes of grief and healing through the protagonist's journey.
Boring!
Now, unfortunately, this doesn't do a good job at meeting the needs of a Module C reflection. Instead, it should sound maybe something like this. I employed fragmented syntax in the opening paragraph to mirror my protagonist's fractured mental state, creating immediate emotional discomfort for the reader.
What?
Now, of course, none of us sound like that in real life, and none of us write like that when we communicate with other people. But in the context of your English studies in Year 12, that type of writing and that way of presenting information is really important, because clearly there's a big difference between paragraph 1 and paragraph 2. Paragraph 1 does a good job at describing what happens in the story, but paragraph 2 more importantly explains the deliberate craft choices that are made to create specific emotional effects and have an emotional impact on the reader. Now, I'd suggest going through your creative piece and finding 3 moments where you made specific language choices to evoke certain feelings from your reader. When you really think about your reflection piece, it's honestly you just pulling back the curtain on your creative process and trying to show the marker exactly how calculated and intentional you were with your creative piece. Now, when it comes to the most important component of any English essay, it's always usually the first few sentences of any paragraph. Because if the first few sentences are boring, generic, or don't tell the marker what they actually want to hear, they're likely just going to move on to the next paper and give you a terrible mark. And so here at KIS, we've developed a very simple 3-sentence structure that you can use for your Module C reflection introductory sentences. So your first sentence should essentially state your aim and your purpose and answer the question of what effect are you trying to have on the reader. Your second sentence should then go into how your prescribed texts actually influenced your writing choices and decisions in evoking those feelings. And then sentence 3 should touch on how you adapted those techniques from your prescribed text into your own creative piece to achieve your desired purpose. So here's an actual example from one of our students using this exact structure. My imaginative piece, The Calling, aims to highlight how ambition sustains meaning in capitalism's mundane chokehold. So this directly answers sentence 1, which is all about aim and purpose. I was influenced by Kafka's Metamorphosis, whose comedic dialogue and dynamic characterization created effective satire that critiqued 20th century existence. Now, this second sentence talks to how the prescribed text influences the writer. Hence, by mirroring Kafka's satirical approach, I employed situational irony and hyperbolic language to expose modern life's absurdities. And the final sentence looks at how the writer ended up using the prescribed techniques in their own creative piece. So what I do is try to rewrite your introductions using this 3-sentence structure, and not just focusing on mentioning your prescribed text a bunch of times in your body paragraphs, but making sure you actually talk to the points that the marker wants to hear, which are things like what you borrowed from the prescribed text, why you borrowed it, and how you ended up adapting it to your own creative piece. So the final thing I'd like to touch on is what actually separates a Band 6 Module C reflection from a Band 5 one. And usually it comes down to the way the body paragraph is written. So most students write in a way that describes and doesn't necessarily analyze, which is what Module C reflections are asking of you. Now, the way Band 6 students think about Module C reflections is in macro and micro terms. So macro being the big structural choices that are used in a creative piece. So things like characterization, setting, and tone. And then you have the micro stuff, which is usually just the language devices, the language techniques. Now I'm going to put up a real example of a Band 6 response for you to just slowly digest. You can see how they're not just identifying techniques, but actually trying to explain the psychological impact their writing is having on the reader. And so for each technique that you use in your own creative piece, ask yourself what specific feeling and emotion is that technique trying to evoke from the reader. Now, if you can't answer that question, that technique is likely a filler, which means that it's essentially there to try and increase the number of language devices that you've used in your response, but doesn't have any actual meaning to your creative piece. And now you know everything that I wish I knew when I was doing the HSC, in particular doing Module C. When it comes to your creative writing, remember that every word choice, every sentence structure, and every image you try to create for the reader should be deliberate and calculated, because it's in the reflection where you get to show off that intentionality. And so in the reflection, remember, it's not just about listing a bunch of techniques and hoping for the best, but showing the marker you understand why those techniques matter and how they create specific effects for your reader. Now, if you want specific examples of how to actually analyze your own creative writing choices and structure for each reflection paragraph, make sure to definitely check out the first link in the description, which will take you to our blog post, where you'll find a Module C reflection cheat sheet that's been written by one of our KIS tutors, and we hope that will help solidify your understanding of today's video. And speaking of today's video, if you enjoyed it, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and let me know your thoughts on how you feel about Module C, and I'll catch you in the next video.